The young woman had never been to a place like this before. The grand building towered over the street, its lights bright against the night sky. A red carpet led to wide glass doors where chauffeurs in crisp uniforms held them open for guests who arrived in sleek cars. She paused for a moment outside, adjusting the simple dress she had chosen. It wasn't expensive, and it didn't have the shine of the gowns and suits she could see through the doors. But it was neat and clean, and that was enough for her. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. Inside, the air was warm, carrying a faint scent of flowers mixed with expensive perfume. Guests chatted in small groups, their laughter filling the high-ceilinged hall. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, reflecting light across polished marble floors. Everywhere she looked, there were people who had clearly spent time, money, and care to be seen. She felt out of place. Not in an obvious way, but in a quiet, subtle sense that made her heart beat faster. She moved slowly along the edge of the room, letting herself take in the scene. Men in tailored suits and women in flowing dresses laughed as servers passed with trays of champagne. Conversations were light, but carried an air of importance. She could hear fragments of words about businesses, investments, travels, and achievements she had only read about. She stayed near the wall, hoping no one would pay much attention to her. Soon, a group of people noticed her. One man raised his eyebrows and whispered something to the person next to him. A woman glanced at her, smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes, and turned back to her friends. Their curiosity was mixed with amusement, and she felt it, but she didn't let it show. She reminded herself why she was there. She had been invited to show her talent, and she would do that. Even if they didn't believe in her yet, she found a quiet corner with a small table and a glass of water. Her hands were steady, but her mind was alert. She had practiced for this moment, though she had never imagined it would be in a room like this. She wasn't wealthy. She didn't have the luxury of growing up surrounded by grand pianos and lessons from renowned teachers. What she had was hours of practice in a small apartment, evenings filled with music, and a determination that had carried her this far. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the long days, the sacrifices, the quiet moments when no one was watching, but she kept going anyway. While she watched, she noticed the piano in the center of the room. It was a grand instrument, black and polished to perfection. People occasionally glanced at it, but no one seemed eager to sit and play. The room buzzed with conversations, but the piano sat quietly, waiting. She felt a strange pull toward it, a mix of nerves and excitement. She knew that when it was her turn, the music she had prepared could speak for itself. Before long, someone approached her. He was tall, dressed in an impeccable suit with a confident smile. "Are you here to perform?" he asked. His tone was polite but carried a hint of doubt. She nodded, keeping her voice calm. "Yes." He glanced around the room and back at her, a faint smirk forming. "Well, we shall see. It's quite a crowd." She smiled politely and thanked him. The remark was meant to be slightly mocking, she realized, but she didn't let it touch her confidence. She had faced skeptics before, and she would face them now, as she walked toward the piano. She noticed the eyes following her. Whispers began as she approached. Some people leaned closer to their friends, pointing subtly. She felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about her music. It was about proving that talent and dedication could stand out, even in a room full of wealth and status. The energy in the air shifted around her. Some guests were curious, some skeptical, and some, she could tell, were already convinced they would be disappointed. She reached the piano and ran her fingers lightly over the keys. The sound was perfect, resonant, and full of life. A small smile formed on her lips. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself center, letting the room fade away. This was her world, her element. The noises, the laughter, the judgments, they could wait. For the next few minutes, it would be about music and nothing else. From across the room, she could feel the attention she had drawn. People stopped talking, some even leaning in slightly. She ignored it. Focus was everything now. She recalled every lesson, every practice session that had brought her here. She recalled the moments of doubt, the moments when giving up seemed easier. and she let them fuel her rather than hold her back. The first notes came gently, almost cautiously, but soon they grew richer, more confident. She moved through the music with a sense of flow, each chord and melody speaking with clarity. The whispers faded as people began to listen. Eyes widened in surprise, some leaning forward as if they could hear the music more clearly that way. She didn't rush, didn't show off, but let the music carry its own story. The room changed. It was subtle at first. A few people exchanged looks, realizing that perhaps their assumptions had been wrong. She continued, completely absorbed, her expression calm but her mind sharp. This was more than performance. It was a statement. She wasn't here for praise. She was here to share something real, something that couldn't be measured by wealth or status. By the time she finished the first piece, a quiet respect had settled over the room. She had not even looked up yet. Slowly, she lifted her gaze and noticed the faces around her. The laughter and mockery had disappeared, replaced with attentive, impressed expressions. Some guests whispered among themselves, clearly surprised. Others simply nodded, acknowledging a talent they had underestimated. She stood, straightened her posture, and offered a small, polite smile. She didn't need to say anything. The music had done the talking for her. For the first time that evening, she felt completely at ease. Confident not in what people thought of her, but in the truth of her ability. Whatever came next, she was ready. She had taken the first step, and had already made a mark. The moment she had reached the piano, she sensed the room watching her in a way she hadn't felt before. The polite curiosity she had noticed earlier had turned into something sharper, heavier, and more judgmental. Conversations slowed. Whispers floated across the polished floors. And some guests leaned closer to each other, whispering remarks that were just loud enough for those nearby to hear. She knew she was being mocked, though most of it was subtle. It wasn't cruel, not yet. But it carried the assumption that she was not worthy of attention here. A man in a dark suit stepped forward. He was tall, with neatly combed hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He looked at the piano and then at her, clearly amused. "Do you really think you can play for this crowd?" he asked. His voice was calm, but his tone carried a sneer. She looked at him directly, steady and unfazed. "I can try," she said softly. But her words held a quiet confidence that made him pause for a moment. Around her, the room shifted. Some guests tried to hide smiles, thinking this would be entertaining. Others simply raised their eyebrows, waiting to see how the performance would turn out. She felt their skepticism like a pressure pressing against her, but instead of shrinking, it made her focus sharper. She remembered all the practice sessions she had endured. The evenings she had spent alone, fingers trembling over keys as she repeated the same notes until they were perfect. That quiet persistence had brought her here, and no mocking could take that away. She adjusted the bench and sat down. Her hands hovered over the keys for a moment, letting her eyes scan the grand piano. Its surface gleamed under the bright lights, reflecting a room full of expectation. The first note she struck was soft, almost hesitant. The sound filled the space, delicate but clear. Some guests nodded slightly, acknowledging that she could indeed play, but the laughter and whispering were not gone yet. The man with the neat hair leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with a smirk that clearly said he expected nothing impressive. She began to play a simple melody at first. Letting the music warm the room slowly, her fingers moved carefully, tracing patterns she had learned through years of repetition. The subtlety of her touch, the control over each note began to change the atmosphere. The whispers dimmed as attention shifted toward the sound she was creating. The initial mockery was replaced by curiosity, though some faces still held doubt. She welcomed that, because if they doubted, the surprise would be greater. As she continued, the melody grew richer, more expressive. She didn't rush or overplay. She let each chord breathe, and each note find its place. The room started to listen with more than polite attention. People unconsciously leaned forward, their conversations silenced by the music. The man in the dark suit leaned slightly, his smirk fading into something closer to surprise. He hadn't expected this. The sounds that flowed from the piano were precise, emotional, and confident. It was clear that the woman in the simple dress was far more capable than anyone had assumed. Some guests tried to mask their interest, but it was impossible to hide the way their heads turned toward her, eyes widening as her performance continued. She noticed a few subtle gestures, a hand placed over a mouth, a lean toward a friend, a slow nod of appreciation. The music was working in its own way. It spoke louder than any words could, and it began to dissolve the assumptions that had filled the room just minutes before. The man in the dark suit finally stepped closer. He watched her fingers dance across the keys, and though he tried to maintain an air of authority, she could sense the tension building in him. Her music was challenging expectations, quietly, without confrontation. He had invited mockery, but instead of a performance that faltered, he thought precision, emotion, and skill. The room, which had been filled with subtle ridicule, now hummed with a different energy. It was the energy of astonishment, of a truth revealed in sound. She shifted to a more complex part of the piece. Her fingers flew across the keys with speed and grace, each note clear and deliberate. The audience's reactions became more pronounced. Some held their breath, others whispered in disbelief. Even those who had been mocking her now found themselves leaning closer, captivated by the music. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't need to. Her mind and heart were fully immersed in the piano, letting her years of practice guide every movement. The room had become quiet in a way it hadn't been since the guests arrived. There was no laughter, no chatter, just the music filling every corner. She felt a subtle shift in the air around her. Where moments ago she had been mocked, now there was respect forming, tentative but undeniable. It wasn't loud or forced. It was quiet acknowledgement of the skill and dedication she possessed. She noticed the subtle changes in posture among the guests. A woman who had been chatting with friends now leaned on the railing, her eyes fixed on the piano. A man in the corner straightened, his arms uncrossed, and he began to listen without judgment. Even the tall man who had sneered at her first words had stopped moving, watching her with a mixture of curiosity and awe. They all expected a performance that would match their assumptions. But they were seeing and hearing something entirely different. The piece moved toward its middle section. It was the part that required the most control, the most technical skill. Her fingers moved with confidence, each note striking with precision. She played with expression, letting the emotions of the music guide her. The room had changed completely. The mocking whispers had disappeared entirely. People were now focused entirely on her, and the energy was one of genuine attention. She could feel it, not in her thoughts, but in the subtle changes around her, the quiet intake of breath, the shifting of weight from one foot to another, the eyes that refused to look away. She played the melody with care, letting it tell a story. It was a story of quiet perseverance, of dedication that had gone unseen by many, but had never gone unnoticed by her. As the music flowed, she could feel the impact it had on the listeners. The room was no longer filled with mockery, but with astonishment and silent admiration. This was the moment she had worked for, the moment when all her effort and sacrifice found its voice and sound. Every note carried intention. Every chord was deliberate. She could sense the shift in energy around the piano. Even those who had doubted her began to appreciate her skill. She was no longer an outsider or a figure of amusement. She had become the center of attention, not through arrogance, but through the simple act of doing what she did best. The piano had become a bridge between her world and theirs, showing that talent and dedication could speak louder than wealth, status, or expectation. The first half of the performance drew to a close, and she allowed the final notes to linger, fading gently into the quiet room. The silence that followed was telling. No one spoke immediately. No one moved. The impact of the music hung in the air, unspoken but deeply felt. She lifted her hands, took a breath, and finally looked up at the crowd. The expressions she saw were different now. The amusement, the mockery, and the doubt had vanished. In their place were eyes filled with surprise, respect, and curiosity. Some guests exchanged glances, clearly acknowledging that they had misjudged her. Others simply nodded, as if they were letting the music speak for itself. The man in the dark suit, who had been the first to challenge her ability, took a step closer, his earlier smirk replaced with a thoughtful expression. It was a quiet transformation, one that spoke volumes. She had not needed to boast, to argue, or to prove herself with words. The music had done it all. As she prepared to continue with the next part of her performance, she felt a sense of calm confidence. The initial mockery had faded completely. What remained was the attention of a room full of people who had been ready to dismiss her, now captivated by her talent. She realized that this was more than a performance. It was a turning point, a moment where assumptions were challenged, and respect was earned through skill, persistence, and the power of music. As she continued to play, the music grew deeper and more intricate. Her fingers moved with a confidence that came from years of dedication, each note precise and deliberate. The melody filled the room, wrapping around the chandeliers and reflecting off the polished walls. The audience was silent now, completely absorbed. Even those who had once whispered or smiled mockingly were now watching intently, unable to look away. The piece she had chosen was not simple. It required control, speed, and emotional depth. She let herself feel the music as she played, letting her emotions guide her hands. There was a story in every chord, a journey in every transition. She had imagined this moment countless times, but nothing compared to the real experience of seeing the surprise and awe on the faces around her. Some guests shifted in their seats, leaning forward slightly as if to catch every note. The man who had doubted her at the beginning now sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the piano, his posture rigid. There was a flicker of respect in his expression, though he did not speak. Others exchanged glances, nodding subtly. Acknowledging that they had underestimated her talent, she moved into a faster section of the composition. Her fingers danced across the keys with fluidity, the notes flowing effortlessly. The room seemed to hold its breath, the sound echoing with clarity. The energy had changed completely. What had begun as skepticism had transformed into admiration. People who had arrived expecting entertainment at someone else's expense were now witnesses to something remarkable. The music shifted again, slower this time, with a softer, more emotional tone. Her hands glided over the keys, bringing out subtle nuances in the melody. The audience was captivated, caught in the ebb and flow of her performance. Some had tears in their eyes, moved by the emotion she conveyed. She did not play for recognition or praise, but for the music itself, and that authenticity resonated. She noticed small details as she played. The way the chandelier lights reflected on the polished surface of the piano. The slight leaning in of the guests as they tried to capture every sound. The hushed whispers of appreciation that no one dared to voice loudly. All of it told her that she had succeeded in commanding the room's attention, not through spectacle, but through genuine skill. The man in the dark suit who had challenged her now seemed thoughtful, his previous smirk gone. He leaned closer, listening carefully. It was clear he had not expected this level of mastery. The music carried a power that spoke louder than any words or gestures. It was undeniable. And even those who had been skeptical could not resist acknowledging it silently as the performance reached its climax. She let her emotions pour into the keys. Her movements were precise but expressive, capturing both technical skill and heartfelt feeling. The audience was spellbound. No one spoke. No one moved unnecessarily. The only sound in the room was the music, filling every corner with life. Her fingers moved quickly, gracefully, and with purpose. Every note deliberate and perfect. She felt a connection with the audience, even without words. The music communicated what she could not say aloud. It told of dedication, perseverance, and talent that had often gone unnoticed. Each chord seemed to carry a message. Do not underestimate those who quietly work, for their efforts may surprise you when least expected. She could see that her message was being received, not through speech, but through the power of her playing. As the final passages approached, she slowed down, allowing the notes to breathe. The room remained completely silent, the audience hanging on each sound. Some guests clasped their hands together, others closed their eyes to focus entirely on the music. She played with both precision and emotion, balancing the technical complexity with expressive storytelling. The grand piano responded beautifully to every touch. Echoing the depth of her skill, the last note lingered, a single sound that faded slowly into the quiet room. For a moment, no one moved, and the stillness was almost palpable. Then, soft murmurs of awe and surprise began to ripple through the crowd. Guests exchanged looks, nodding to each other in acknowledgement. The man in the dark suit approached slowly, his expression a mix of astonishment and newfound respect. He offered a small, sincere smile, as if admitting he had been wrong to doubt her. She rose from the bench gracefully, her hands folded gently in front of her. The performance had not been about proving anyone wrong. It had been about sharing her talent honestly. Yet, she could see that she had changed the room, that perceptions had shifted. The audience had witnessed not only her skill, but her dedication and passion. The initial mockery had been replaced with admiration and respect as she stepped away from the piano. She felt a quiet satisfaction. The experience had been transformative not only for the audience, but for herself. She had faced skepticism and judgment with calm confidence and let her abilities speak for themselves. The moment was more than just a performance. It was a statement of perseverance, of skill honed through years of effort, and of the quiet strength that comes from believing in oneself. The atmosphere remained charged with energy. As she moved toward the edge of the room, people who had initially dismissed her were now engaged, asking questions, complimenting her, and discussing the performance among themselves. She walked with a sense of humility, acknowledging the change in the room but not needing to dominate it. The music had done what words could not. It had earned respect effortlessly. As she glanced around, she noticed that some guests had shifted in their understanding of talent and determination. The mockery and doubt had been replaced with genuine interest and appreciation. She had not only shared her music, but had subtly challenged their assumptions, leaving an impression that would linger long after the evening ended. She felt a quiet pride, knowing that her performance had touched people in a real, meaningful way. With the audience captivated and the room filled with the lingering resonance of her music, she prepared herself for the final part of the evening. The performance had reached its peak, and yet there was still more to share. She felt ready, calm, and confident, knowing that each note she played could continue to inspire and surprise those who had doubted her from the start. The journey of her music and the impact it had on the audience was far from over. The room seemed to hold its breath as she moved into the next part of her performance. Her fingers glided over the keys with effortless skill, each note precise and filled with feeling. She played not for applause, not for recognition, but because the music demanded it. The melodies were intricate, sometimes soft and delicate, sometimes strong and commanding. Every note carried emotion, every chord spoke a story. The audience, once skeptical, was now completely absorbed. From across the room, she could see the subtle changes in the faces around her. The man who had doubted her first now leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the railing, eyes fixed on her fingers. He no longer smirked or whispered to anyone. He was completely focused, captivated by the performance unfolding before him. Others who had laughed or whispered in amusement were now silent, their expressions revealing a mix of surprise and awe. She did not notice them directly. Her attention was entirely on the music. The melody shifted again, rising and falling with a rhythm that seemed to mirror human emotion itself. It was powerful but controlled, demanding attention without forcing it. Guests who had arrived expecting casual entertainment were now witnesses to something extraordinary. The music created an invisible thread connecting everyone in the room, binding them in shared wonder. Each note seemed to pull them deeper into her world, making them forget the wealth, the status, and the previous judgments. She could sense the energy in the room changing. What had been quiet mockery was now replaced by quiet admiration. People who had been ready to dismiss her were now leaning in, exchanging glances as they tried to process the skill and emotion before them. Some unconsciously held their breath during particularly complex passages, while others nodded slightly, acknowledging the control and artistry they were seeing. Even the chandelier light seemed to shimmer more brightly as her music filled the space, as if the room itself recognized the moment. As she transitioned into the more dramatic section, The technical difficulty increased. Her fingers moved swiftly, gracefully, yet with precision that spoke of countless hours of practice. Each chord rang with clarity, each note placed with purpose. The audience could feel the intensity building, and it was impossible not to be affected by it. Some guests leaned forward, unable to resist the pull of the music, while others simply closed their eyes. Letting the sound wash over them, she noticed subtle reactions that she could feel, but not hear directly. The tall man, once mocking, now had his arms resting on the railing, his face showing surprise and respect. He caught her eye briefly, offering a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement that she had exceeded every expectation. Others around him whispered softly, but their words were not dismissive. They were tentative expressions of amazement, an unspoken agreement that they had misjudged her. The room seemed to shrink around the piano as her music expanded. The subtle humor and ridicule that had filled the space earlier had been replaced entirely by attention and engagement. People who had arrived expecting to be entertained at someone else's expense were now participating in a shared experience. Caught in the depth of her skill and the authenticity of her performance, she could feel the shift without glancing up, the energy of the audience rising and settling in waves as the music flowed. Her performance reached a point where technique and emotion blended seamlessly. She allowed herself to be fully immersed, letting her body and mind move in harmony with the keys. The music became more than notes. It was a story, a conversation without words. It conveyed the strength of determination, the quiet persistence of someone who had spent years honing her craft in solitude. Each chord resonated with the truth of her journey, and the audience felt it. The most critical moment of her performance came unexpectedly. She struck a chord that seemed to silence the entire room even further. The sound lingered, echoing off the walls, demanding attention. Eyes widened, jaws relaxed, and the atmosphere thickened with recognition. It was a turning point, a moment where the audience understood that the woman in the simple dress had not only skill but a depth of expression that could move anyone who listened closely. The initial mockery had been shattered, placed by a profound respect that needed no words. People exchanged glances, some shifting in their seats, others leaning forward, captivated. The man who had been the most vocal in his doubts now stood, his posture straight, absorbing every note. His earlier smirk had vanished entirely, replaced by an expression that carried admiration and disbelief. He was speechless, as if he had expected one thing and was now confronted with something entirely beyond expectation. The room followed his lead, a ripple of silent acknowledgement spreading through the crowd. She transitioned into a slower, more expressive section, letting her emotions flow freely through the keys. Each note carried weight, each pause was intentional. The audience was rapt, moved by the subtle power of the performance. Some were visibly touched, their eyes misty, their faces softening. They had come expecting a light-hearted showcase, but they were witnessing something far deeper, a human story told entirely through music. The energy in the room shifted from curiosity to wonder, and finally to quiet reverence. She noticed that even the smallest gestures of the guests had changed. The hands that had once clutched glasses in judgment now rested gently, some clasped together, some lightly touching the railing, as if grounding themselves in the moment. The subtle shifting of weight, the slow nods, the brief intake of breath, all signs of the transformation occurring before her. She felt a connection with every person in the room, a silent acknowledgement of shared understanding through music. As she approached the final passages of the performance, the intensity increased once more. Her fingers moved quickly, elegantly, yet each note remained clear and distinct. The grand piano responded perfectly, echoing her intent and emotion. The audience, now fully captivated, seemed to hold their collective breath. Caught in the balance of technical mastery and heartfelt expression, they had arrived expecting entertainment, perhaps some amusement, but they were now witnesses to a moment of genuine artistry. The final notes approached, and she allowed them to resonate fully, lingering in the air, creating a powerful sense of closure. The room remained silent for a beat longer than expected, as if no one wanted to break the spell. Then, slowly, subtle murmurs began to spread, soft expressions of admiration, almost shy. As the audience tried to find words for what they had experienced, even the most skeptical of her listeners could not deny the impact of the performance. The man who had doubted her first stepped forward, his expression unreadable at first. Then, with careful thought, he offered a small smile, the kind that acknowledges a truth previously ignored. He had expected mockery and had found talent, skill, and artistry that left him momentarily speechless. Other guests followed, quietly offering nods, soft comments of praise, and small gestures of respect. The transformation in perception was complete. The music had done what words could not. It had shifted hearts and minds in a way that was undeniable. She rose gracefully from the piano, her hands folded gently in front of her. She offered a soft smile, not boastful, not triumphant, just calm and composed. The audience's expressions ranged from admiration to awe, and the room felt lighter, yet charged with the energy of what had just occurred. The mockery had disappeared entirely, replaced by acknowledgement, respect, and, in some cases, a sense of wonder at the quiet strength and undeniable talent they had witnessed. She stepped back from the piano, her fingers lingering slightly over the keys, as if reluctant to let go of the connection she had built with the music. The room was quiet, the air still, and for a moment she allowed herself to take it all in. Faces around her reflected a mixture of awe, surprise, and genuine admiration. The earlier skepticism had completely vanished, replaced by respect that was clear and unspoken. The man who had challenged her first slowly approached, his expression carefully measured. He was not arrogant, nor dismissive, nor mocking. Instead, there was a quiet acknowledgement in his eyes, a recognition of the skill and dedication that she had demonstrated. He stopped just a few steps away and offered a small nod, a gesture that spoke volumes. It was an apology without words, a moment of respect that needed no explanation. The other guests mirrored his reaction in various ways, some leaning forward slightly, some exchanging soft words of praise with their neighbors. She allowed herself a small smile, one that was calm and composed, not seeking validation but simply accepting the acknowledgement. She had come to the gathering with the intention of performing, not to prove anyone wrong, but the impact of her music had surpassed what she had imagined. The room, once filled with casual whispers and subtle mockery, now radiated a quiet energy of appreciation, the kind that comes from witnessing something authentic and extraordinary. As she moved toward the edge of the room, she noticed subtle changes in posture and attention. Guests who had been checking their phones or talking lightly among themselves were now fully engaged, some nodding in time with the echoes of the music still lingering in the air. Their focus, once scattered and casual, had become intentional. She realized that she had done more than play the piano. She had created a shared experience that connected everyone present in a moment of genuine appreciation. A soft murmur of conversation began, careful and deliberate, as people discussed what they had just heard. Their words were not dismissive, not mocking, but thoughtful. Some spoke in hushed tones about the complexity of the piece, the precision of her technique, or the emotion that had come through every note. Others reflected on the dedication and persistence that had brought her to this moment. Every observation, every comment, was a testament to the power of her performance and the transformation it had created. The man in the dark suit, who had been the first to question her, now spoke, his voice steady but sincere. "Your performance was remarkable," he said simply. The words carrying weight because they came after doubt and expectation had been thoroughly tested. There was no pretense, no exaggeration, only genuine respect. His acknowledgement seemed to encourage others, and more voices began to express their admiration. The atmosphere was no longer tense or expectant, but warm and engaged. A reflection of the authenticity she had brought to the piano, she moved through the room with grace, acknowledging the silent recognition with gentle nods. Her presence was calm, not seeking attention, yet the room seemed to revolve subtly around the impact of her performance. Every glance, every gesture from the audience reinforced the message that talent, Dedication and authenticity cannot be ignored or underestimated. She felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of completeness that came not from applause, but from knowing she had shared something real and meaningful. As she walked toward the exit of the performance space, she noticed the lingering reactions. Conversations had resumed, but they were infused with a different tone, one of reflection and respect. People were sharing impressions, commenting on the unexpected depth and skill, and subtly acknowledging that their earlier assumptions had been challenged. She felt the weight of that realization quietly. Understanding that she had changed the room without needing to speak a word, her thoughts wandered briefly to the journey that had brought her here. The years of practice, the moments of doubt, the quiet hours spent perfecting each note, all of it had led to this instant. The performance was more than just music. It was a culmination of perseverance, passion, and belief in oneself. She understood that this was the kind of moment that lingered in memory, not because of spectacle, but because of the human truth it conveyed. The piano, now silent, seemed almost to breathe with the echoes of the music that had filled the space. She glanced back at it, a sense of gratitude passing through her for the instrument that had carried her expression so faithfully. The room, once filled with expectation and subtle judgment, had been transformed into a space of acknowledgement and respect. She had arrived quietly, unassuming, and she left with the quiet knowledge that she had made a lasting impression. Guests began to approach her in small groups, offering words of praise, some shyly, some confidently. Their admiration was genuine, free of pretense, and it was clear that her talent had earned a place in their memory. She responded with calm gratitude, listening and acknowledging their comments without fanfare. Each interaction reinforced the impact of her performance, not as a show of superiority, but as a testament to the dedication and authenticity that had guided her. Throughout her journey, the man who had doubted her at the start finally spoke again, this time with a tone that carried a quiet respect and newfound understanding. "I underestimated you," he admitted simply. She nodded, offering a soft smile, accepting the acknowledgement without need for further words. His admission reflected a shift in perception, one that rippled subtly through the room as others considered their own assumptions and judgments. The moment was complete, a silent victory for skill, perseverance, and authenticity. As the evening progressed, the energy in the room remained transformed. Conversations flowed, but they carried a sense of reflection and understanding. It's the kind that comes after witnessing something extraordinary. Her presence, calm and unassuming, continued to command respect without the need for display. She had arrived quietly, performed with honesty and dedication, and left a lasting impression that would linger long after the notes had faded. She stepped away from the performance space, her heart calm and steady. The journey of the evening had been about more than music. It had been about human connection, the power of talent to bridge expectations, and the subtle ways that authenticity can command respect. She walked through the grand hall one last time, noticing the lingering glances and quiet smiles, a testament to the impact of her performance. As she left the building and stepped into the cool night air, she allowed herself a small moment of reflection. The evening had tested expectations, challenged assumptions, and revealed the quiet strength that comes from dedication and passion. She had faced skepticism with calm confidence and had allowed her abilities to speak for themselves. The memory of the performance, the faces of those who had witnessed it, and the subtle energy of admiration would stay with her, a reminder of what can be achieved through perseverance, talent, and authenticity. The city lights reflected on the wet pavement, casting a soft glow around her as she walked away. She felt a sense of completion, not from applause or recognition, but from the knowledge that she had shared something real, something meaningful, and something that could not be forgotten. The music had spoken. The audience had listened, and in that moment, the young woman had not only performed, but had left a mark on everyone who had been present, quietly and powerfully. Through the universal language of her piano, the evening continued long after her performance had ended. But the impact she had made lingered in the minds of everyone present. People moved around the room in quiet discussion, sharing their impressions and recounting moments that had struck them most during her playing. Even those who had been the most skeptical found themselves unable to stop talking about the skill and emotion she had conveyed. It was clear that her performance had left a lasting impression, one that would not fade with time. She walked through the room, observing the subtle changes in the atmosphere. Guests who had been reserved or distant now approached her, offering sincere compliments. Some spoke in whispers, as if afraid that louder praise might diminish the authenticity of the moment, while others shared their thoughts with a calm confidence that reflected their admiration. She listened to each comment with quiet gratitude, responding with gentle nods and soft smiles. She had never sought recognition, but it was humbling to see how her music had resonated so deeply. The man who had first doubted her lingered nearby, watching as others spoke to her. He no longer carried the air of superiority he had when she arrived. Instead, there was a thoughtful expression on his face, as if he were processing the lesson he had received. She noticed a small smile play on his lips when he observed the admiration of the room. It was clear that he had learned something important, a realization about talent, effort, and the dangers of underestimating someone based on appearance or circumstance. As the evening wore on, she found a quiet corner to rest for a moment. The energy of the room had shifted, no longer dominated by casual conversation or subtle mockery, but by an air of appreciation and reflection. She allowed herself a brief moment to think about the journey that had brought her here, the years of practice, the quiet determination, the sacrifices that had often gone unnoticed. Every note she had played was a testament to her commitment and passion. The impact she had made on this room was proof that perseverance could transcend expectation. Her mind wandered to the people she had encountered earlier, those who had laughed or whispered doubts. She imagined how they might remember this evening, how they would carry the